I'd like to thank you all for being with us this morning. This is our 13th annual media symposium. And as I was driving in this morning, I was thinking about what an accomplishment that is for the partnership, but how it's a testament also to the people in the room who continue to come out every year and support the event. This is exclusively for you all. We try to keep it intimate, and we really want to make it a day where you can come and learn about what we believe will be the top 10 issues to be looking at across the Georgia education landscape. So we're excited about the day. As I said, we've got a great lineup for you of speakers and an awesome panel at the end of the day as well. Before I go any further, I would like to invite up Laura Evans, who is the Director of Education here at Georgia Public Broadcasting, and she's going to provide our welcome.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Georgia Public Broadcasting. We're so excited to have you here today and very thankful to Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education for hosting an event like this that brings us all together when it comes to making sure that Georgia's students are ready for school and on or above grade level. We all have to speak the same language, and this is the type of event that gets us all there. So thank you to GPEE for doing such great research and putting together materials that help us all speak that language. I know on our end at GPB, our mission is lifelong learning, and that starts with our youngest learners. And we often use the top 10 and some of the EdQuest data and research to drive what we set as our initiatives for each year. And this past year, through some of the discussions I've had and some of the critical issues forums, we decided to shift a little bit and go more towards early learning. We started a new early learning initiative this past year where we'll be working with high needs, underserved communities to build and strengthen that home to school connection using some of the research-based PBS Kids resources and curriculum to work with families, community partners, and children. So thanks to Steve and Dana and all the great work that you do. We're excited to have you guys here. It looks like you've got a packed agenda full of good information. So enjoy your day here. And if you're ever interested in some of the great work we're doing here at GPB Education, feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I think I forgot to actually introduce myself when I opened. My apologies. But I am Robert Gaines. I'm the Director of Communications here at the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. I am coming up on a year being here, and I've had the privilege of attending as a guest in previous years. So very happy to be with you this morning in this capacity. A couple of things I'd like to go over in your packets with you. I will not read everything or go through every item, but a couple of things I would like to highlight. The first is the agenda. Everything we'll be going through today, I think you all got it ahead of time. You'll see all the speakers listed, their titles and their organizations as well. We've also got bios in there that you could read at your leisure as speakers come up to get more background information. We've also provided an evaluation sheet, which for us is very critical in ensuring that this program is valuable to you. And if there are any opportunities for us to improve the experience, we can do that based on your feedback. So please take the time before the day is over to fill that out and return it to us. We'd really appreciate it. We also have a press release in your folder that you can use to share about the event. We're not promoting this event or the top 10 until later in the afternoon. So this is exclusively for you until a little bit later when we will share with the world that the report is out. We also have a one-pager in there called The Power of the Partnership, and this gives you a snapshot glance at a lot of the work we've been doing over the last few years. Kind of gives you a rundown of what we've been working on and a lot of our achievements. We also have the EdQuest one-pager. If you were with us last year, you know we launched EdQuest Georgia, which is our policy framework that goes through 7 different buckets of work that we're recommending Georgia invest in. And so if you need a refresher, that document is also in your packet. A couple of housekeeping items. If you need to use the restroom, out this back door to the left, there is a door with a male and female symbol on it, that door splits off into the restroom. So if you need to step out, that's the direction you want to go. We also have provided refreshments in the back. So the door in the back will take you there. You can get coffee, beverages. Let's see what else. As I mentioned, the evaluations are really helpful for us. So again, as you're here today, please take note of anything that you think could be improved or that you would like to see. I also want to thank the people in the room, a lot of the journalists in the room who provide a heads up for us on what they think some of the top 10 issues could be. We touch base with you each year, and you all respond and really help us out in thinking through what are some important issues in Georgia. There are some new faces in the room, and there are some faces of folks who have been here every year, and we thank you all again for being here. We enjoy being a nonpartisan resource for you when it comes to education policy. And whenever you all may have a question, please know, as many of you do, that you can call us at any time. We will do our best to answer your questions. If there are questions we do not have the expertise to provide an answer for, we will direct you to someone who can. That's something we take pride in as well. And so with the top 10 report coming out today, we ask that you all leverage your networks to share it. We know a lot of people, but you all know more people than we may know. And so once it goes live, we ask that you send it to your friends, anyone you know that cares about education in Georgia or is curious about what's happening in Georgia. Please forward the report to them. It's available on our website right now. If you go to our homepage, there's a huge banner that looks exactly like the report. If you click through, you can download the PDF. An email will also go out today that will direct you to the report. So please feel free to forward that at your leisure. Also, the presenters will be available for interview today. We ask that you conduct any interviews you would like to do around the break times in the lobby, just so that we can keep this space for the program. And we also have a few guests with us who are not in the media, and I'd like to introduce those individuals. First, we have Ms. Autumn Blanchard from the Southern Education Foundation. She's the Director of Communications there, and if you have any questions about Southern Education Foundation, she'd be happy to help you. Beth Day, I believe, is en route. She's with Southern Regional Education Board. Mark D'Alessio from TCSG, I do not believe is here yet. Taylor Hudson from GLSSI. If you have any questions about education leadership, she can direct you to the right people at their organization. We have Mr. Reg Griffin with us in the back, who is from Bright from the Start, DeKalb. We also have Danielle Williams on this side of the room, along with Liz Young, also from DeKalb. Is Jai James here? Not yet? Okay, she's from GBPI. She should be here. We also have Donna Lowry, who is back with us. She is with GPB, starts on Monday, so congratulations to you. We have Mr. Justin Pauley from Georgia School Boards Association. And I think Ken Zeff will be here later. He is not here yet, but if you want to talk to him about Learn for Life, he should be available. Lastly, before I introduce our speaker, I would like to acknowledge our team. Dr. Steve Dolinger, who may have stepped out. Okay, no worries. Ms. Diane Hopkins in the back. We have Ms. Alice Ford, who is manning our resource table and our registration. Dr. Dana Rickman, who you already heard from this morning. Elisa Edelman is in the back as well. Ms. Merrill Wilcox is outside. And Ms. Teresa Brower in the back. So, welcome again. Without further ado, I would like to bring up Dr. Dana Rickman, our Vice President, who will get us kicked off talking about the top 10 issues to watch for 2019.
Thank you, Robert, and good morning, everybody. Again, I am Dana Rickman with the Georgia Partnership, and it is my great privilege and honor and with much excitement that I bring to you the 2019 Top 10 Issues to Watch. I was thinking on my drive in here this morning that when we're in the weeds of developing this sucker, and usually around end of November, 1st of December, I always keep this vision in my head of this day, of me standing up here presenting a finished product. And that keeps us going through the tedium of putting it together. And I'm so proud of it this year. And this year in particular, I want to acknowledge I had a lot of help from partnership staff in putting it together, especially Robert Gaines, Elisa Edelman, and Meryl Wilcox really helped with a lot of the issues this year. And also Steve and Diane provided some really great guidance and input. And so I think this year, even more so than other years, this really was a true collaborative partnership effort. And so I just want to acknowledge everybody's hard work to bring this to you today. And so, really excited. Before I get into the specific issues, for any of you who are new to the partnership or new to the top 10, I want to give you sort of a brief overview of the publication. This is our 15th publication, the 15th year we've done the top 10. And despite the fact every year I lobby for maybe top 5 issues, we're committed to 10. We'll keep bringing 10. But it's our list of critical issues really to provide a research-based, nonpartisan analysis of what we feel will be the critical issues moving forward in 2019. And I always get the question, how do you pick the issues, right? And so we pull together a policy committee of policy advocates like myself, people in education, people outside education, people in the legislature, and sort of go over, what are the top trends in research, what are some study committees that have been happening, what are new rules that are going to be released, and try to sort of anticipate the best that we can, what's the legislator going to be talking about next year. Also, too, we'd like to save a spot for 1 or 2 issues that we feel are actually critical to student achievement but maybe aren't getting enough attention. And so to really shine a light on and raise up some issues that we feel should be getting more attention. And so we bring these issues to you, and there are 10, and they're numbered 1 through 10, but I want to emphasize that that is not in any particular hierarchical order. I like to think that they are all equally important. They're in sort of an order that I think makes sense for the reader, but beyond that, there's no particular more important or least important. And so without further ado, drum roll. This is my favorite part. And then I realize you have it in front of you, so you already know, but just bear with me. If I get a couple oohs and ahs as I go through, it would really fluff up my ego. The first issue that we're looking at is new leadership, changes at the Capitol. I don't know if y'all have heard, we have a new governor that's going to be inaugurated next week. And not only do we have a new governor, but we have a lot of new leadership at the state level. We have a new lieutenant governor. We will certainly have a new head of the House Education Committee, potentially a new chair of Senate Education Committee. So we'll see a lot of new faces, a lot of new leadership coming through in Georgia. We will have some stability in K-12 as Superintendent Richard Woods was reelected. But with so many new faces and many new priorities, this issue really looks at, how may that affect education issues moving forward in Georgia. The second issue, early learning, quality early care and its economic impact. We're going to have a panel later today about this specific issue to really dive into this, but a survey was conducted this past year, supported by Gears and the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, and that 25% of parents who were surveyed who have young children reported that someone in their family either quit a job, didn't accept a job, or greatly changed their participation in the labor market because of issues with childcare. And this kind of instability, the study further estimates an annual loss to the state economy of $1.7 billion. That's billion with a B. And an additional tax revenue loss of about $105 million. And so this issue of access to quality child care is not only important to individual families, but to the economic health of our state. And so we're going to talk more about that later today. Teaching, elevating the profession now, right now. This is one of the issues, once I'm through this 10, I'm going to talk more specifically about. School safety, much more than metal detectors. When we think about a comprehensive school safety plan, certainly the physical security of the building is very important, but a comprehensive safety plan also takes into account things like school climate, discipline, the behavioral and mental health of both students and faculty that work in that school. We'll have a speaker coming up directly after me today. The Executive Director of Safety and Security from Fulton County Schools is really going to talk to this issue and how they've looked at this in Fulton County and give you guys some real concrete examples. As always, usually funding is on my list. This year, is fully funding QBE enough? As many of you no doubt know, this past year, Governor Nathan Deal finally, what we call fully funded the state education formula, meaning that we no longer have austerity cuts. But when we look at education funding, one thing that we still don't know is how much it actually costs to educate a child. We know how much we're willing to spend, but that's different to what it would actually cost to educate a student to the level of which we are now expecting from our students and our educators. So this issue really looks into that idea. Number 6, assessments, testing the waters. Yes, we're still talking about assessments. Those have not gone away. And you'll hear later today from Allison Timberlake from the Georgia Department of Education about where we are with assessments, but there's been a lot of new exciting things happening in the field of assessments. We have waivers for some local districts. The state has applied for a waiver from USED to figure out, what do we want from our assessments? What are we ultimately using them for? What's the best way to get good assessments to teachers, to educators, to help inform instruction, but also let us know as parents, as community members, how our students are doing and how our education system is doing. Issue 7. ESAs, vouchers, taking a hard look at what's next. For years, the debates around choice centered on charter schools. And I think for the most part, charter schools is a settled question in Georgia. We have them. There are many excellent charter schools. It's no longer a debate. Sort of the next frontier of choice, though, parental choice in education, has to do with different vouchers and also SSOs, student scholarship organizations. And the new sort of vanguard policy that people are looking at are ESAs, education savings accounts. And so this issue really takes a deep dive into what are these different options, what they may mean for Georgia. Summer start date, more than meets the eye. Briefly, it's really hot at the beginning of August. This is an issue I'll talk more about in just a moment. Dual enrollment, growth and sustainability. Over the past 5 years, dual enrollment the participation in it has just exploded. It's an incredibly popular program. We've seen a 49% increase in participation over the past 5 years and a 133% increase in state spending on dual enrollment. And so it's growing rapidly. There are issues, though, for an expensive program. How do we scale it? How do we sustain it? Is it being accessed equitably? There are many concerns that low-income students and minority students are really underrepresented in this program, and so this issue really takes a look at how do we scale it and sustain it in an equitable way and guaranteeing access to everybody. And finally, issue number 10, post-secondary, cost and other barriers that impede success. This is the third issue that I'll take a deep dive into during my comments. So before I look at those 3 issues in a little more detail, if you look at pages 2 and 3, I and II at the front of your book, those of you who know me know that I love data, but I'm not going to put a bunch of pie charts out for you as much as I would love to. I love a good scatter plot. But what we try to do is track how Georgia's doing over time and how are we progressing on some really key measures of educational outcomes for students. And so I want to stress that this is how we're trending, this is how we're going in terms of progress. And for those of you who have been at this event before, especially over the past couple of years, I think you'll be happy to see that we have a lot more green. If you guys can decode my clever scheme here. Green means we're progressing in a positive direction. Yellow means caution, and red is bad. A couple of years ago when I first started doing that, there's a lot of red on this little chart, which was very concerning for a lot of people. But we have been working really hard as a state to turn those reds to yellow and green. What I want to draw your attention to actually on these, though, low birth weight babies is red. We've always had a relatively high percentage of low birth weight babies relative to the rest of the nation, but it's been pretty steady. This one's almost always been yellow over the past couple of years, but recently we've seen an uptick in the percentage of low birth weight babies in the state. That's concerning because, as we know, the Get Georgia Reading campaign has done some research that has shown a very high correlation between low birth weight being born premature at a low birth weight and not being reading proficiently at grade level by the 3rd grade. And so these are the future students that our schools are going to have to be contending with. Also, children in poverty, for the first time since I started working at the partnership, it's now green. It's green not because it's really a good number, but has finally started to drop a little bit. It has been slowly increasing over the past several years, and we peaked at about 28%, and so this is the first year that that peak is starting to go down. And so it's still higher than the national average. We're still in like the top 10 of children in poverty, but we've started to turn the corner. And so that is encouraging. So it gets a light green. So hopefully we'll look for that trend to continue. The first issue that I want to dive into is issue number 3, teaching, elevating the profession now. I think almost every year out of the legislature, we hear somebody say we need to treat teachers like professionals. We hear that all the time, right? But we don't actually do anything about it. Like nothing really changes to make teachers feel like they're part of an elevated profession. And so in doing my research for this, you see sort of a general definition of a profession. Thinking about a professional, and it's things like if you enter a profession that requires rigorous training, positive working conditions, active professional organization, you see these sort of 6 things that qualify a profession as opposed to just a job. And so in education, educating children requires specialized knowledge, skills, and it really deserves the same status and standing as other sort of traditional, we think of, professions. And for Georgia to attract and maintain a highly qualified, highly effective teaching pool, educators need to feel that they're valued for this expertise. And so we really have to think about how does Georgia professionalize teaching to inspire this sort of shared spirit of high standards, high expectations, public service among both those going into teaching and how those of us outside of education view the profession of teaching. There's 3 real elements to the professionalization of a field. One is wages, benefits, which includes both health care, sick time, retirement, and also professional pathways. And I pulled out a chart, figure 3.1. It's on page 17 in your book. You'll see wages for school teachers. And it looks at it compared to other college graduates, and so people who have a 4-year degree, as almost all teachers do, at a minimum a 4-year degree. And then the red line is just sort of all people in the workforce. And you can see, over the past, since about 1980, there's always been a wage gap between public teachers, these are public school teachers, and other college graduates. Through the mid-90s, it was closing, and it kind of peaked. You could see that's sort of where a dotted line there. You could see where it looks like we might be closing, but then it turned at the late 90s, and that wage gap has been getting bigger and bigger over time. And so if you think about trying to incentivize your best and brightest high school students to go into public education as a field, if they understand that not only will they not make as much if they go into an other type of profession, but that the wage gap is actually increasing over time, that's not a great selling point for recruitment. That's just one example of how we think about professionalization. So what can we do about this? Well, there's recommendations out there. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with 2-3 years ago, Governor Nathan Deal's Education Reform Commission. And one of the sub areas that they looked at was this idea of recruitment and retention of teachers. And they had what came out of there were some really good recommendations that were then vetted by a teacher's advisory council that reviewed them. And one of the ideas that they came, really a good look at compensation review. There's an example in your book about Gwinnett County, sort of a sidebar on page 17, that is really experimenting with this idea of how we pay teachers differently. And it was developed in consultation with teachers about how to do a different type of pay structure. One of those was increased compensation for increased responsibilities. If you're going to take on more responsibilities in the classroom, you should probably be compensated for that. Another one is a full year of pre-service training. Much like residencies for medical schools, residencies for teachers. Many of our institutions that train teachers do require now a full year of pre-service training, but it's not required by the state. It's up to the individual school. Also, service cancelable loans. In terms of many students have to take out loans to pay for college and post-secondary. If they go into teaching, service cancelable loans can be an incredible incentive to get people into the field. Some of the opportunities that we highlight, a re-examination of the current TRS, which is the teacher retirement system. It's a defined benefit plan, which means you pay into it throughout your entire teaching career, and in Georgia, you can retire and start drawing about the age of 60. If you have 10 years of work experience, you're fully vested after 10 years. But the problem is we know that a significant proportion of our teachers don't stay in the field for 20, 30 years. They're not in long enough to receive the benefit from this plan. A lot of teachers leave after 5 years, after 10 years, so they never see the benefit of this type of plan. The development of teacher leaders. One of the issues from last year for 2018 was this idea of teacher leadership and sort of a teacher pathway, a professional pathway that allows teachers to stay in the classroom but gain more responsibility, more knowledge. And if you remember, one of the definitions of professionalism was substantial workplace authority. So how do we get teachers more authority, more control over what they're doing, and then appropriately compensate them for that? And then another opportunity, one that would be sort of a short-term fix, is to allow retired teachers to return to work full-time while continuing to draw retirement. And what that means is currently by Georgia law, a retired teacher who's drawing on their TRS benefit can't work more than part-time back in the school system. The limit is up to about 83 hours per month as of June 2018. This would especially help our rural counties who have a teacher shortage. They know who their good teachers are. They know people who love to teach. If we could help get them back into the classroom and continue drawing their TRS benefits while they're teaching again full-time, it's almost a two birds with one stone. The TRS has estimated that if we allowed them back into the classroom at full time, it would add an estimated $60 million a year back into the TRS system. And so we're shoring up more of the financial stability of TRS, and we're looking at addressing teacher shortage, especially in hard to staff schools or geographies or subjects. And so finally about this issue, we think Georgia really needs to develop sort of a quality teaching and learning plan. Like sort of long-term, what's the schedule of investments for teaching and professionals that would take into account a total compensation structure, tiered certification and career ladders, and sort of meaningful professional development that keeps teachers engaged in their career here. Yes?
Just a question. I'm not sure this is already allowed under the flexibility waivers or charter systems, but I know there are a lot of states, for example, Tennessee is allowing retired law enforcement, public safety professionals to transition into teaching.
Yep.
Because there's so many, it's a male-dominated field, and they're providing and they're not losing their retirement pay through public safety to become a teacher, and it's really bringing a lot of that. And I don't know, what is the standard in Georgia about allowing professionals and others to transition into teaching?
We actually do pretty good with that, as far as I know. I'm not going to give you a great answer because I'm a little fuzzy on that, but we do have a pretty robust alternative certification programs. And actually, the Professional Standards Commission is the one that sort of, I guess, certifies the teacher training programs. They also certify the alternative certification programs. And they have the same standards for alternative certification programs as they do our traditional, if you go to UGA or GSU or Kennesaw and get your teaching license. And so they're pretty, they're highly regulated by the Professional Standards Commission. And so we're constantly looking for ways to other avenues of entry into the field. And those kinds of retired professionals wouldn't bump up against this TRS problem because they weren't in the teacher retirement system. They're in the state retirement system, which is separate. Yes, ma'am.
To give her an example, Gwinnett County, actually, using Gwinnett County again, they have kind of like an academy where you go for a year, and if you already have like a bachelor's degree in something else, that's how they're able to get people like engineering or, higher math and that kind of stuff. And as a matter of fact, I'm working on a story about that, kind of a second act thing. And so if you're interested, you know, they do, I have to say that, I guess being the, 10th largest school district in the country, that Gwinnett really does try to be progressive in those types of things. But it's been very successful, and I don't, you know, off the top of my head, I can't spot the numbers, but they've been able to turn a lot of positions where they can't find teachers with practical experience, as well as the skill set to do the teaching. They've been pretty successful.
Yeah, the Georgia Partnership hosts a program called the Woodrow Wilson Teaching Fellows Program. And that is one where they take professionals from the STEM fields, science, science teachers, engineers, things like that, and they go through a master's program. And they get a stipend for a year to go through teachers training at the master's level, and then they partner. There's, I think, 5 institutions of higher education that participate in this, and then those institutions partner with the local districts to try and place these STEM teachers, and especially high-need, hard-to-staff schools in the STEM area. So there's a couple different alternative certification programs that are trying to target specifically that. The next issue I want to look at is summer start date, more than meets the eye. This is a graphic that was provided to us from the Department of Education. It's on page 53 in your book, and it just illustrates when, by district, when school starts currently, or this past school year, and when it ends. And you can see that a majority of schools start around the first 2 weeks of August, and almost all of them are done by Memorial Day. And this past year, in March of 2018, a Senate study committee was established to explore the school calendar in Georgia. And at the time, they were looking at possibly state mandating a start date after Labor Day. Currently, local school boards set the school calendar, and they all do it a little bit differently. Some have a lot of community engagement, and some have less, as you can imagine. But they really try to incorporate, community preferences and things like that. Proponents of this later start date argued that, Georgia's economy could greatly benefit from a start date after Labor Day. Primarily, you think of a place like Six Flags, a significant portion of their staff are high school students, right? So they're staffed by students who have since, gone back to school 1st of August, and also families, can take longer summer vacations, and that would boost the state economy. And so they really took this past year to study this issue. What we wanted to highlight in this issue, in the issue in the book, is how complicated this actually is. And it's not just a matter of, oh, let's start after Labor Day. And to be clear, what they're talking about is still the 180 days. They're not talking about changing the number of days of school, just when it starts and when it ends. And some of the things as we dug into this that you really need to consider and how complicated it is, one is just an idea of sort of around logistics, around sort of benchmarking and our assessment calendar. And if you guys want to ask Allison about this later, you can. But before we sort of moved the start dates back to August, if we started after Labor Day, the semester classes wouldn't end until like mid-January. So you had a lot of kids who were on their holiday break who were either, stressed about taking final exams if it was a semester class, or midterms after they get back from break. Teachers were worried that they would forget stuff over the holidays, drinking a lot of eggnog, I guess. And also too, like AP exams are scheduled at the national level, and those tends to be sometime in the first 2 weeks of May. And so we wanted to get enough learning in for those students to be competitive on the AP exams. For me personally, I think more critical than that are the next 2 bullets. Summer learning loss, we know from the research, there's a great graphic on page 54 of your book. Low-income students lose about 2 months of learning and reading over the summer. Higher income students actually gain reading over the summer. And so as you go from 1st grade to 2nd grade to 3rd grade, you see a widening of gap. And a lot of that has to do with summer learning loss. And related to that are summer learning opportunities. One is the cost of summer learning. Summer camp programs, any kind of summer enrichment programs. On average, summer programs in Georgia cost about $288 a week. And so if you're talking about a 6-week program, that could run upwards of $3,500 per child. And then we know that a majority of our students in our public K-12 systems come from low-income families. And that cost is just simply prohibitive to low-income families. And that's a cost assuming the program exists for you to attend. Especially in our rural areas, there really is not a lot of availability of summer opportunities and summer enrichment programs. If you look at this, participation in summer programs, about 25% in rural areas, where you see like 41% in urban areas. And that's despite the fact about half of all parents surveyed said that they would like their child to participate in a summer learning opportunity. We already talked about the benefits in economic development if we moved the summer start date. Travel and hospitality is the state's 5th largest industry and provides over 445,000 jobs in the state. And tourism contributes over $60 billion to state revenue and $3.1 billion in direct and indirect tax revenue. And so it's a significant factor to think about as we're looking for resources to run our state. It's a significant piece of it. Also significant to take into account is student safety. As I mentioned, and as you all know, it's really hot in August, especially those first 2 weeks of August. So it's much more expensive for schools to run their air conditioning. A lot of our buses are dated and have fair to Midland air conditioning, to say the least. And also we think about like sports workout, and every year we hear some sort of tragedy about a student who gets very ill or overheats during those football practices and things into July, 1st of August. It's just really hot. Also, though, to take into account is this idea around local priorities. For example, Houston County schedules their fall break around the state fair. Their agricultural 4-H is very important. That state fair is very important to them. Richmond County around Augusta obviously schedules their spring break around the Masters. Coweta County, I thought this was interesting. They create a 3-year calendar. So they do 3 years at a time. And the reason is they have a significantly high proportion of parents who work for Delta. And Delta requires apparently long-term planning on vacations. And so this 3-year calendar really allows families to think long-term about when the kids are going to be in school. And so all these kinds of issues need to be weighed when we think about just mandating a start date. Right after Christmas, the Senate Study Committee released their recommendation and their findings, and they said you basically change the state law, so we'll see some legislation around this, to provide guardrails. So they're not mandating a specific start date, but they are saying that they want to set where a district would set their school year to start no earlier than 7 to 10 days before Labor Day and end around January 1st. So we'll be seeing some discussion about that moving forward. And so what I'd like for people to take away from this issue is that the state of Georgia itself has very little to almost no investment in summer learning opportunities for students. Most of that is either federal dollars that flow through Georgia or parent fees for summer enrichment programs. And so the calendar debate really allows us an opportunity to think about how do students spend their summer, right? Summer looks different for different families of different socioeconomic backgrounds and also rural students versus urban students. So to take all of this into account as we think about maximizing both economic development and students' abilities to learn. Finally, the last issue I want to go in depth on, issue 10, post-secondary, cost and other barriers impede success. These charts are on page 67 of your book, and what they're initially looking at is probably no surprise to anyone in this room who has been following post-secondary access and completion. This first chart, there you go, is the percentage of students that enroll in post-secondary, either USG or TCSG, within 16 months of graduating high school. So they get their gap year in if they want to, and they can go back in. And then the red bar is they completed 1 year of credits within 2 years. And so you see a significant drop-off. Already you see the gaps of enrollment, but you also see the gaps of drop-off where, frankly, regardless of race or ethnicity, students have trouble maintaining even once they have enrolled. So access is clearly important, but persistence is especially important. If you look at this chart over here, figure 10.2, those are the graduation rates for the University of Georgia system broken out by income, and then also type of, we have our research university, our comprehensive universities, and there's clearly a gap in completion rates based on income. And so when we talk a lot about income and the cost of getting students into school and through school, we talk a lot about aid and financial aid, need-based aid, and that conversation is really focused on tuition and fees. What this issue really looks at is, yes, tuition and fees are incredibly important, and we need to be able to make sure that students can pay those in one way, shape, or form, but we think about sort of the hidden cost of going to school, especially first-generation college students who have not experienced that things like cost of living, housing and dining. This graphic shows an increase of the cost of both tuition and fees and housing and dining over about a 10-year period. And you can see it's almost the cost of living that has gone up more than tuition on these students. In a national survey that was done that surveyed Georgia as well, almost 9% of post-secondary students have experienced some form of homelessness. Nearly 40% were considered housing insecure. And those are higher than average numbers compared to national averages. So when we think about completing post-secondary degrees, either technical college or university system, it's not just about covering tuition. There's so much more that goes into that, and there's a lot of barriers that are in place. And so finally, some of the things that we can do about that. The 2018 legislative session saw the passage of House Bill 787. The majority of 787 was about charter schools, but there was about 2 paragraphs tagged on to the end that established a statewide need-based aid program. And when I say established, I mean they wrote the words down. That's really all it did. And so the bill targets students who, quote, families are considered economically disadvantaged. It's about all it says at this point. The definition of disadvantage has yet to be determined. And so we need more, so that this bill actually just says we need to be doing this, right? We, as many of you know, we've talked about this before, Georgia's one of 2 states in the country, New Hampshire's the other, does not have a statewide need-based aid program for post-secondary. Hope Scholarship is not need-based. And so moving forward, we really need to think about what's the definition of disadvantage, who's going to be eligible for this, how are we going to pay for it. None of that was included in the bill. Currently, the Georgia Student Finance Commission has estimated an initial cost, depending on how the state defines disadvantage, of between like $25 and $40 million. And so that's a challenge that we have moving forward, is how to flesh this out. Many of you are aware of the Complete College Georgia initiative. In the book, we highlight the great work that Georgia State University has been doing for first-generation college students, at-risk college students. But here's sort of a summary of the types of things that they do. But Complete College Georgia is really looking at trying to get students in and through post-secondary as efficiently as possible. So there's a lot of examples in the book. Maureen, did you have a question?
No, but
Are you just waving at me?
I'm just going thinking. But
Yeah.
one thing I do want to say about, I've learned something now, having had children in Georgia Tech, UGA, Emory, Georgia State, and that is, I think one thing I never looked at was the role of the colleges in dragging out the diploma process. Because as a longtime writer in education, I would get calls from people saying, particularly Georgia State, I can't get this course I need in education. I have to stay a whole extra semester. And my kids now are facing that, even at Georgia Tech, which you think would be more boutique, let's say, because it's smaller. And so it's really interesting to me that I haven't personally looked at the obstacles. We praise these colleges for their efficiency. What we don't talk about is that as schools move to automation, for example, like Georgia State, there's fewer people in the buildings to answer questions. And I can vouch, I've personally been on hold an hour and a half, never getting anybody on the phone. So now I'm talking to students about, can you get your classes? And that's been, and both at UGA, any school that's had an explosion in people, and programs that really get popular, for example, the film programs that are always education programs. So I'm feeling guilty that as a reporter, I haven't looked at what aren't the colleges doing, because we give them a lot of kudos for what they are doing. And I would suggest that you all look at that as well. How are we stopping kids from going efficiently through these universities?
Yeah, and it's an interesting question too. I was talking to somebody the other day that especially first-generation college students, I don't think they understand. There's no way that they could. Like, the mission of K-12 is to help get students through and graduate. The mission of post-secondary is a little bit different. Like, they are not responsible for Dana making sure everything that she needs to graduate on time. Now, a lot of schools have taken that on, but they're about providing knowledge, right? And it's a whole different kind of thing, and they're not, I mean, we do have a university system and a technical college system, but the universities in particularly, they're their own little kingdom there, and they're gonna, and so I was hearing stories the other day, we hear about the purge of the rolls, of students who owe $200, can't pay it, they're purged. All universities and colleges purge differently. Some don't do it at all. Some have a hard and fast, you got to go. I'm sorry. There's not a lot of coordination if you go from one school to the other. The rules are different. The support systems are different. So there's a lot, I think, of coordinating that we can do, and that's where Complete College Georgia is really trying to do that. They had some initial success. It kind of faded, and now they're kind of back, especially with the success of Georgia State University and what they've been able to do. Other schools are like, oh, we actually can do this, what seems like an insurmountable problem. We've seen some success, so I expect to see that pop up again. And I'm getting the side eye from Robert. And so questions, apparently not now, but anytime. Again, these are the 10. I'm going to be around all day. If you have other questions, please feel free to just seek me out. And as you know, I could talk about this forever. And so thank you for your attention, and I will hand it back over to Robert.
Thank you, Dana. At this time, we're going to have Dr. Shannon Flannery from Fulton County Schools. He's the Executive Director of Safety and Security, and he will come up and discuss school safety for us. Dr. Flannery.
Good morning. First of all, let me thank you for the opportunity to come and share with you today. As you are aware, it's no big surprise. There is not any forum in which the topic of education comes up in which safety and security is not among the top priorities. The first thing I really want to just kind of emphasize, I remember a number of years ago, prior to this role in the late 90s, the biggest issue of safety and security in a school or in a school district was to make sure that the fire drills were conducted appropriately and reported. And I think by now everybody knows it's no big secret that we have extended far beyond that. So when we look at comprehensive safety and security in today's environment, it really is an all-hazards approach. An all-hazards approach, of course, is looking at how can we prevent or mitigate certain unfortunate circumstances from occurring in and around our campuses. How can we prepare for events that inevitably have occurred throughout the nation? How do we respond to it? And after the occurrence, specifically, how do we go back and recover so that we can get back to the business, our primary business as educators, and that is educating students. Quite often, I engage in conversation with my non-school-based friends, individuals who really don't have an idea of what the safety concerns are or what we really do as educators. But I want you to think about this for a second. This is not an all-inclusive list, but in today's society, the concern for general safety and security extends far beyond ensuring that the fire drills have been conducted. In any school environment, these are situations that we either have been in positions that we've had to address, or inevitably it will happen. I can share with you that over half of these issues we have dealt with or had to address this past school years. I think many people have seen all of the situations in which there have been weapons that are confiscated in schools, and I know that the ability or the things that have been happening with the active shooter scenarios are a primary concern, but all of these are concerns that as school officials we have to prepare ourselves for and ensure that there are provisions and protocols that are in place to be able to address these. In Fulton County Schools, we have had our rash of unfortunate circumstances such as student suicides. That's, of course, included on this list. And you would ask, well, what are the community issues that schools will have to deal with? And I will share with you this morning that there are never situations or circumstances within communities that inevitably schools and school districts don't have to address. It just kind of comes with the territory, to be honest. So with that in mind, many school districts, depending upon the size and depending upon the complexities of the district, have different ways in which they are organized to address particular issues. In Fulton County Schools, the umbrella of safety and security is very comprehensive, and I had this conversation this morning. The Department of Safety and Security in Fulton County Schools, this role literally is a 24-hour job. Under that umbrella, within our school district, we do have the sub-departments of emergency operations, health services, and school police, all married to form the overall umbrella. And I want to talk to you specifically about some processes that we have in place, but more specifically how these departments marry to provide an umbrella of safety for the students in our district. Emergency operations or emergency management, and this is going to be a surprise to a lot of people. Again, this department, we work specifically with ensuring that students and school district leaders are in positions that they're able to adequately prepare, emergency preparedness drills, that they're executed with laser-like precision, with a specific emphasis upon the active shooter response protocols. We started active shooter response protocols in 2014 as a result of taking very, very proactive measures, looking at what was going on around the country. And as these events have occurred, as professionals, what we do, we study what things went well, what things didn't go so well. And it was very reassuring to our staff and community that this last incident, after it occurred in Parkland, that Fulton County Schools was already ahead of the curve in terms of ensuring that we had protocols in place. It's important that our students and our staff know how to respond. Social media and threats being issued via social media has been something that has occurred most recently. And of course, anytime we have situations in which a threat has been received, we first of all monitor that, and we have to follow up with every particular post and assume a high level of credibility until we have information to the contrary. Within our district, we do have tools for monitoring social media. Anything that's posted on a public domain, we have immediate access to it. And if it is a threat or a perceived threat, you know, our team specifically, police department and emergency operations kind of pulls back all the layers to determine. To date, we have not had a credible threat via social media, but again, this is a learning opportunity for students to understand they really, really do need to think about what they post before they post it, simply because 30 years ago, if you make a threat to a student, whether it's joking or not, you know, I'm going to beat you up or I'm going to kill you, saying to one person who may interpret it one way has a different meaning than if you put it on social media in today's climate. So quite often, we do have to step in and ensure that if things are posted, we will really get to the bottom of it. Within our organization and emergency operations as well, the biggest threat right now statistically in the state of Georgia, we know what the one that's going to have the most adverse impact, but the biggest threat in the state of Georgia is weather. So our team does spend a lot of time monitoring to ensure that our schools are adequately prepared and to ensure that as we are providing appropriate data, that we're looking at the live data and we're providing analytical information to our district leaders so that the decision to either close school, have an early dismissal, or a late arrival, that our superintendent does have all the important information to be able to make that decision. Now, I cannot share with you the importance and how beneficial it has been for us in Fulton County Schools. We're very, very fortunate to have the video monitoring capabilities that we have, and I'll talk about that in a little while in a little bit more detail. But video monitoring is important for not only investigative purposes, but for proactive measures as well. And I'm going to talk about the sophistication of the systems that we use. And one of the things that came up with the State Senate Committee study was, having video cameras in schools. And we have had video surveillance systems within our school district at all 102 of our schools and our 8 support facilities for a number of years, but technology changes. So we're in that process now. We have, at the end of this year, we'll have about 2/3 of our schools that are upgraded with the most sophisticated video surveillance systems that's on the market, the level of which you see in more secure environments such as federal courthouses and things of that nature. Access to buildings is very, very important. We want to invite the community to be participatory within their children's educational processes, but we also reserve the right to be able to set up preliminary boundaries or checkpoints before we unlock the doors to say, come into our buildings, to be able to verify that all of our buildings are equipped with access control or what is affectionately known as door access systems. You come to ABC Elementary School, you just don't pull open our doors and walk in. You must identify yourself, and remotely you will be granted access into the office area. As I mentioned earlier, we want to encourage our business partners, our parents, our communities to be participatory in the educational processes. However, as a school district, a major school district, we also reserve the right to be able to determine if it's in the best interest of the school district to accept your volunteering. So having appropriate visitor management systems in place, specifically the system that we use is known as Raptor. Someone comes in, they are a parent, they're a volunteer. We actually have to take that person's driver's license, scan it, and the system does a national search to ensure that the person who's coming in to visit or volunteer is not associated with any national or statewide sexual offender list. It is not a full-scale background that we would do on a chaperone or an employee, but it is an initial scan to determine if you meet the criteria to serve as a visitor or volunteer specifically. Coordination of school district emergencies, when it happens, it does happen very quickly, whether it is at the schools, whether it is at one of our facilities. Our emergency operations team will convene in what's known as the Emergency Operations Center. And the Emergency Operations Center in Fulton County Schools is a centralized command system, very similar to what you will see in most municipalities, in that we're able to monitor via video surveillance any of our schools. We're able to go back and detect, but we also have the ability to take over a school's intercom system. If we're tracking weather or we're tracking something that we do not know or understand, remotely from this locations, we can take over that school's intercom system to place that school on lockdown. But we're very, very fortunate. A lot of times when we have weather situations, as we're looking and tracking, principals who have done a great job in terms of training their staff, they're already taking the appropriate measures. This, of course, is no way that I am advertising any of the tools that we use, but I will share with you that it's very, very important to have a situation in which students and extended community members are able to provide us with information. Through our extension of our school messenger, which is a communications tool, we have worked with the vendor to develop an app known as Quick Tip, and we have been utilizing that for the past 3 years. It allows any user the opportunity to share information with us. Although we have an abundance of tools that are very efficient for our use, this is about establishing a culture in which students, extended community members, staff, and administrators, as well as other safety personnel, own it and understand that safety and security is everyone's responsibility. So in short, when this tool rolled out, it did not take off until the second year. Word kind of spread. It gives the user the ability to provide information to district leaders, and they can do so totally anonymously if they choose. Now, I can share with you that this year alone, we have been able to intercept more than a couple of students who have contemplated suicide. This is a 24/7 app. We get this information quite often, depending upon the time of day that we get it. We're communicating with the schools, we're communicating with our social workers and counselors to be able to intercept and provide the appropriate services for the student. Very rarely has a student himself or herself provided this information. Normally what happens is that the student shares information with a friend. That friend lets us know, and it just says that, you know, our students are really doing the right thing and they are owning this. I talked briefly a second ago about the capabilities of these video systems, these state-of-the-art video systems that we have, and I just want to just kind of share that for a second, because the systems that we use within the Fulton County School District actually incorporates a high degree of artificial intelligence. Again, it allows for on-site monitoring of schools. It is so accurate, the level of accurateness is such that literally if someone is in a parking lot in one of our schools, we can take this system that we have right now, at the end of this year, it'll be in 2/3 of our schools. This project started probably about 4.5 years ago, and it will be totally completed by the end of 2021. I can basically look on my computer screen, find Dr. Dolinger in his car, and zoom in and pull his name off his name tag. That's just how accurate it is, okay? But wait, there's more. As every generation comes out, the generation that we installed last year has actually the capabilities of what's known as advanced appearance search. What does that do? What information does it provide for us? Well, student John Doe walks and carries himself or herself a certain way. I can tag student John Doe and pick up that signature of John Doe and tell you what building that this student or this person has been in for any school that has this capability. The other capabilities of these systems is facial recognition. You've heard about how this is being utilized at the airport. But guess what? It is here. This capability is here in Fulton County Schools, and the newest generation that has just been rolled out is known as weapons identification. Basically, it looks at the profile. If someone did have a weapon, we can kind of set it. I'm not talking about police because the level of intelligence of this equipment is such that we program it to recognize when a weapon is holstered and what that looks like when it's in police. So you can tag, let's say it's an AR-15, you can tag that, and what it'll do, it'll send automatic alerts. So we just really touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of the surveillance system, but I will share with you as well, in addition to the surveillance system, we want to make sure that we have mechanisms in place, and we do, in which there is monitoring of these surveillance systems. Last year, actually the year before last, we actually started with the municipality of Sandy Springs. Fulton County Schools is a very unique animal in that we don't have just one municipality that we work with. We work with 12 different municipalities. Palmetto, Fairburn, all the way up to Johns Creek, Milton, Alpharetta, and Sandy Springs. Different municipalities have different capabilities as well as their technological resources and capabilities. We did start with the city of Sandy Springs to give them access to our video terminals for the new systems that we are installing. So any school in the city of Sandy Springs that has this technology that we're rolling out, and not all schools, although all schools have video surveillance capabilities, not all schools have this particular system. But all of the schools that have this system installed, Sandy Springs Municipality, through an MOU, through our IT personnel working with their IT personnel, has the ability to pull up our cameras within our school. Well, what is the relevance of this? If there is a situation, a potential threat, it serves the purposes of allowing the local municipality first responders from their computers in their cars to be able to look inside of our building so they will know, where the threat is, because the primary concern, of course, will be threat neutralization. As mentioned earlier, as a part of the health services, the safety and security umbrella is student health services. And I think at some particular point, we need to remove the term student and just refer to it as health services, because our team provides support for not only student issues, but quite often there are staff issues or staff members who may be experiencing a health-related emergency, or in some particular case, a mental health related concern. Our student health department, of course, coordinates all of the health services throughout the schools through local clinic aides, and the way it is established within Fulton County School District, and different districts have their health departments set up in different manners, is that all 102 of our schools has a full-time clinic assistant. But we have employed 18 cluster nurses that work and support all of those schools. In addition to that, we have 6 special education nurses that work specifically with special needs students. Quite often their needs extend beyond the normal crises protocols that we have for mainstream students. Our department also is responsible for maintaining all of the immunization records, as well as providing appropriate CPR and AED training. And as you know, last year the state did roll out the Stop the Bleed campaign. So we have to date trained all 102 of our schools on the Stop the Bleed campaign. Student Health Services also is responsible for coordinating the annual hearing, vision, and scoliosis screening. And here's the thing that is just unbelievable. Many of our students, the number of students that we have about 96,000 students in Fulton County schools. About 33,000 students have individualized medical plans. Whether those plans are related to the administration of insulin or so have it, each cluster nurse has to coordinate with school clinic aides to ensure that these plans are followed as per the guidelines of the physicians. That is a massive, massive responsibility. Policing in our schools. This has always been a major, I'm going to say, liability if it is not practiced in the most appropriate manners. Whether school districts are employing traditional school resource officers, that means that these officers are employed by local municipalities and are on contract back to the local school to provide police services, or whether school districts such as Fulton County Schools employ their own police department. Either way, it must be very clear that the roles for school police are very, very specific, and that the triad model working in schools must be clearly emphasized. And I'll share with you that working in school environments is different than working in local municipalities. And having done both, I can attest that not every good officer who works in municipalities would necessarily be a good fit for school environments, because our roles in school environments, in addition to law enforcement, we also have to serve as unofficial mentors and counselors. We know students don't always make right choices. It's the nature of the beast. I think personally, and having been one of those kids, the brains aren't fully developed. So if the mindset is that every time a student does something that is not necessarily appropriate, if that mindset is, I'm going to charge this kid, then maybe that's not the right person or the right fit for school environments. Why? Because students are going to have disagreements. A student fight, is that a criminal charge? Yes, there's a law in the books for that, a fray. Well, the officer has some discretion of whether or not he's going to charge that student, or he's going to turn that student over to the local school administration for appropriate disciplinary consequences. And, you know, our officers are very good about differentiating when they're going to make a criminal charge, vice when they're going to turn it over to the local school administration for appropriate disciplinary consequences, and knowing when to engage or when it would be appropriate. What we do not do in Fulton County Schools is have our officers engage in student discipline. We have all seen instances and circumstances in which police engage in matters that they should not, what normally happens is you end up with students who have erred in their judgment all of a sudden starting their criminal file because, maybe the officer was not understanding that this is not the street in which they police prior to coming into the school district. Nonetheless, the fact that officers are working in schools, it should never be minimized because at the end of the day, they are police. There is a need, and we do this very, very well, a need for tactical training specifically for school environments with rapid response capabilities and threat neutralization. What does this mean? That means nobody wants to think about the likelihood of a mass school shooting. But we think about this every day. We practice threat neutralization every day. What if this scenario happens? How have we planned to address that issue? So the active shooter law enforcement response should be a continued part of the training for any of the officers who work in school environments. Since we have our own police department, we do have various units of that, and a tactical response team, also known as special weapons and training team, their primary role is threat neutralization. We practice this in our buildings. We practice with local municipalities. We practice with local municipality SWAT teams on a continuing and ongoing basis. In addition to that, we spend a lot of time reviewing our building plans, our procedures with local municipalities. And so one of the things that we recommend, and this actually came out in one of our group safety, community safety team meetings, is that we continue and we review this information and we provide building schematics to local municipalities, and that's what we do. We depend so much on our local municipalities for support. In many cases, they depend upon us for support as well. We had 71 officer positions in Fulton County Schools up until last month when the school board approved an additional 16 positions. So that takes us to about a police department of sworn officers of right about 90 officers, a little less than 90 officers. So I'll submit to you today that our police department is larger than most of the municipalities that we work with. Again, collaborative training with these municipalities is essential for our operation. Last year, our officers participated in a very, very critical training. We have 90% of our officers who have participated in what's known as crisis intervention training. Well, what is crisis intervention training? Well, quite often our officers come in contact with not just students, but the general public who just happen to be on our campuses for whatever the reasons are. Sometimes some of the actions that we come in contact with for the untrained eye or the untrained officer may be perceived in a manner by which the person or the potential offender has no control. So being able to recognize when someone is having a mental health crisis is very, very important. Many police departments are rolling this training out to their officers to work with the general public. Fulton County Schools, we started this, as I said, a number of years ago. The year before last, we rolled this out. And so as our new officers are coming on board, we're vetting additional officers to join our team now. We are ensuring that once they complete field training, that they are engaged in this 40-hour training course as well. As a school district, we want to make sure that, we feel that we're doing some things appropriately. But we also wanted to send it to the community. What are your thoughts? Tell us what it is that we're not thinking about. So we hosted a series of community forums, safety forums, in which the community brought back some additional safety enhancements. Some of the recommendations that the community made, we already had in place. So what this told us is that as a school district, we really needed to spend some more time communicating, at least to the extent by which we could, what some of our additional safety parameters are. School buses, all of our school buses have video surveillance on our buses, okay? So if there's a situation on the bus, and let's face it, buses are soft targets. We don't want to think about that. We don't want to think about if someone really wanted to launch an attack, the school buses are soft targets. No, we don't. So we wanted to ensure that our bus drivers were trained as well on how to report any suspicious activity. But if there are situations on a bus, we can go back and review the tapes because all of our buses are, of course, equipped with video surveillance. A number of school districts in the metro have rolled out apps that alert parents in predetermined geolocations when buses have arrived at certain spots, that parents can get this information on their app via a secure login. It's attached to our student information system. We roll this out in the fall. So if I have a child in Fulton County Schools, sometimes the bus is late. I can actually track the bus to see where it is, or I can set it and get a timer. If it's within 3 minutes of the drop-off, I can set that up so that it will send me an alert. Appropriate mental health supports. Our school district committed additional personnel to address this issue, 10 SEL counselors to work with Department of Safety and Security specifically for the purposes of determining if we have students that are exhibiting certain signs, how we can track and how we can give them additional support. Most recently, we received 2 grants for this, both for the amount of $185,000. One will work specifically with safety and security. The other one will work specifically with the Department of Counseling, Social Workers, and Psychological Services. Those plans have been submitted, and hopefully after the government shutdown has been concluded, those funds can be deposited and we can move forward as we have planned. Building assessments and threat assessments. Building assessments are critical. So quite often we send our team of security monitors out to local schools to look with a predetermined rubric to look at the safety and security protocols. And they have a specific script that they'll follow and things that they will inspect. Upon conclusion, what our team does is provides this information back to the principals. It is a good system of checks and balances because we have systems in place. Then we need to go back and check those systems to make sure that they are being conducted with fidelity. So what do we know specifically? Here's what experience teaches us. We got to address the elephant in the room, and this is a very uncomfortable conversation. So quite often when I go back and have the conversations with school district leaders, I don't want to be the person that brings the bad news, but we must prepare ourselves because truth of the matter is we probably have not seen the last school shooting. So we can't pretend that it's not going to happen. What we have to do is continue to prepare. So in Fulton County Schools, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a tactical team who works against and trains other officers. These persons are highly trained and they will be the first responders when it comes down to a situation that requires an immediate tactical response. The expansion of our police department most recently gave us the ability to provide a very directed elementary patrol function. The way that our department is set up at this point is that all high schools are allocated 2 officer positions, all middle schools are allocated 1 officer position. However, all officers have an elementary school assignment. So at some particular point during the day, they leave their primary schools to go and patrol their elementary schools. The additional positions created as a result of the expansion of the police department gives us a specific dedicated elementary patrol function. We don't want it to be a situation in which the only time that the elementary schools see the officers is when there is an issue, mainly custody issues. So our elementary schools will see the officers more regularly than they have in the past. So I will conclude just by saying this, as I said earlier, and this is actually my favorite slide in the whole presentation because it pretty much tells a story. I won't read it to you, but in short, doesn't matter what the tools are that we have, and we use those tools very, very well. This is always about people over products. And what do I mean when I say that? I mean that we continue in Fulton County Schools to establish a culture and a climate such that everyone has to own safety and security. We're so very, very proud and so very, very fortunate to be in an environment in which our students give us information. As a school district, do we have issues that other school districts, other urban districts have? Yes. Do we find weapons in school? Yes. But I can tell you, as I shared with a recent interview in one of the media outlets, and the question was, are you concerned about the weapons that you find in the schools? Because there was some report that said Fulton County Schools had more weapons than any other school district. I said, no, you have the narrative all wrong. Fulton County Schools, if a child brings a weapon into the school, we're going to find it. They don't get the weapons here. We don't provide them with the weapons, but if they bring that weapon, we're going to find it. We don't have metal detectors. Well, how do you find the weapons? It's simple. People tell us. They tell us on quick tips. And I remember the last little situation I had, and this kid, he kind of told me, he said, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, but where I live, I have to have this for protection, and I forgot to take it out. And he said, oh, by the way, how'd you know I had it? Magic. Thank you very much. I have 3 minutes. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to know, you mentioned active shooter drills, and there have been some skepticism, a little bit of skepticism about how those might affect kids. And, I mean, obviously, like a school shooting would be traumatic.
It would be.
But what are your thoughts on how active shooter drills are conducted and whether or not?
So here are my thoughts on this. Our school district right now is developing a curriculum that is more specific for elementary. Active shooter drills for non-law enforcement are teacher-led specifically, okay? So staff should be working with the middle school and high school students in terms of that. Now, I've heard different school districts say, hey, we're gonna go in here and we're gonna simulate this and we're gonna pretend that we're going to be the active shooter. Pump the brakes on that, and here is why. For the reason that you just said, that can be a very traumatic experience for an early childhood environment. I remember as a first-year principal, we had code terms. We don't use code terms anymore. We call it what it is. And for an intruder drill, as it was called then, the code term was the tigers are loose. Well, the first time I said the tigers were loose, I had a bunch of parents that called me and said, my child came home and said that there are some loose tigers in the building. So as you can imagine, that would be a problem. Now imagine someone coming into a school simulating there's an actual active shooter. So my viewpoints are that we have these discussions, we talk with middle schools and high schools, this is what we're going to do, but at the end of the day, this is a teacher-led drill. Because when it actually happens in a high school, if I have a 300-pound or a 250-pound football player and this guy's here with the gun, it's very likely that that person may have to engage that person to save his life, or whether it's a teacher or a student or what have you. You don't expect that kind of arrangement or that kind of response from a first grader, okay? Yes?
I had a question as far as, you mentioned a lot of the different safety protocol that you have. How closely are you working with the GBI? Because I know in the Senate safety recommendations, they talked about the silos, and there's so many individual plans.
Yes.
And to do some sort of centralization for prevention as well as during the process.
So let me just share this with you. We have a number of facilities in Fulton County Schools, two specifically, that are unoccupied, that we use not only with the GBI, and I can't say the GBI specifically, we've worked with the FBI, ATF, many local municipalities for one purpose, and that's building takedowns. Now, it was very convenient because many of them reached out to us because we're the only school police department with a tactical team. So we provide a lot of training for some of the smaller municipalities, but we work with federal and local agencies for coordinated efforts in terms of the communication piece. Can I tell you the GBI specifically? No, I can't. I'm not sure if we train with the GBI, but the other ones that I've called, we have.
Well, and even with the app, because that was one of the big issues, is there's so many different apps out there that, you know, what if somebody in Cherokee County knows about something that's happening in Fulton. So if they're not calling your specific one, if there's not a centralized one for the state, there's be some valuable time.
Oh, I agree with that. And if I'm not mistaken, in the last training that we actually presented at the Carl Vinson Institute, they are really rolling out a statewide app that will allow for there to be more coordinated efforts. But keep in mind, we started this app before all this conversation actually started. We have had situations in which threats were called in and persons had information, and they did share that information with us for follow-up. It's sort of the same as any other local municipality. If something happened in DeKalb County that inevitably will impact Fulton County, believe me, those leaders on the line talking with Fulton County authorities through their networks as well. We have networks, but it is kind of antiquated. It's pick up the phone, it's send an email, depending upon the urgency. We train collaboratively. Our police chiefs in all the areas meet monthly, and they pick various locations in which they meet.